All right, now we are at chapter 21 of Mounce Ch grammar, and we're going to be dealing with a new tense. It is the imperfect tense. The imperfect tense indicates action, continuing action in past time. So there are some characteristics that we're going to learn. It's not a very complicated tense. It does give us a new element for the word and some new kinds of endings, but once you learn this set of endings, you will have learned for the imperfect active and imperfect middle or passive, then you'll have learned all of the endings except for the aorist and future passive endings, which we will look at a little bit later. So let's take a look at this. First of all, look at the exegetical insight and the overview, because he tells you about some of that. He gives you some tips about the English use of the imperfect, and it's really, in English, there's only one simple past tense, so it's a little bit more complicated in Greek. But he talks about the two past tenses. Well, one would be imperfect, the other would be aorist, which we will meet later. The new element for the word is the augment, and it will take two forms. Either it will be the letter epsilon if a word begins with a consonant, and if a verb begins with a vowel, there will be a lengthening of the vowel. And we'll learn that if it's an omicron, it'll lengthen to an omega. If it's an epsilon, it'll lengthen to an eta. If it's an alpha, it will also lengthen to an eta. So the eta will be used for both of those in that sense. Sorry, my other computer ran out of power. I had to plug it in. Excuse me for that. All right, so we're going to be looking also at the secondary endings. We've already learned the primary active and primary middle passive endings. We're going to learn the secondary active and secondary passive, or middle and passive endings here in this chapter. So read through that very carefully. He starts dealing with the imperfect active in section 21.6 and gives you a chart there. You see the epsilon, that's the augment, and then lu is the stem, and the omicron is the connecting vowel, and nu is the ending. The endings are nu, sigma, blank, min, ted, nu. And then in the middle passive, we'll meet them in just a minute. That's the imperfect active ending. It also uses the omicron, epsilon, epsilon, omicron connecting vowel. So that's very similar. And he gives you, again, the comparison to the present, and I think that helps to get an idea. The imperfect middle passive begins at 21.8, and he gives you a chart there with the augment, the stem, the omicron connecting vowel, and then the main ending. The endings here are main, so, to, meta, ste, nuta. Now the so is going to make some changes, and you can probably guess why, because it begins with a sigma. When the sigma's there, and it's connected with some other letters, it's usually often going to make some changes. But you will see the paradigm. You need to learn that, be able to write that for both the active and the passive in the imperfect. Then it starts in 21.10 with the characteristics, talks about the augment, gives you some good information about that. Read that very carefully. And then he talks he continues that conversation on the next page, on page 186. It uses the present tense stem, so we're still with that present tense stem. We talked about connecting vowel and personal endings. All right, halftime review, you know what that means. It means it's time to go back and review. Make sure you got a grip on this, and if you haven't, go back and review it. And then he gives you, at 21.14, this master personal ending chart, and it is now complete. You got the primary active, primary middle or passive, the secondary active, secondary middle or passive. So you want to be sure to note that, put it in your notebook in that completed form. 2115 has to do with recognition, and he's simply giving you a comparison, and so I'd read that carefully and then move on from that. He refers to deponent verbs in 2116. Again, read it carefully. The parsing hint in 2117 is helpful to you. First thing you ask is this a present tense or is it something else? And that's a good way to start. And then he talks about how to translate that. Talks about compound verbs. We've talked about those a little bit already. And that is when you have an augment with a compound verb, the preposition, the augment goes after the preposition. So he will show you some examples of that. For instance, at 2121, you will see ek balo in the imperfect, which will be ex ebulon. You will see a couple of things happening there. You got to stop because the kappa has the air stop, and so that changes to the psi or c, and then it goes. Then the augment goes following that. So note that. He talks about contract verbs in 2122. Just note how that develops and what happens when you have that vowel at the end of the stem, and you'll see that. What is extremely important again in 2123 is the imperfect of a me. You want to learn that, and you also want to. I'd write it down and put it in the notebook. It comes up so often, and you'll run into questions about that. And if you keep looking it up, then you'll be able to learn it as you go. Summary is again very helpful, as it always is. The master verb chart continues to build. It will continue to build for a while, and then he gives you the vocabulary. The vocabulary is akluteo, didasko, eperotao, erotao, thelo, peripateo, synagoge, Pharisees, and then chronos. It gives you again some advanced information and some exegesis, and I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. So we'll see you in the next video.